Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much.
So aussehen meine Folien.
Yeah, those are my slides.
Ja, vielen Dank, dass ihr alle hier hingekommen seid.
Thank you for coming to my talk today at the end of this last day. And yeah, we're gonna spend an hour together, quite absurd of an hour. But why absurd? I think it's pretty absurd to stand on the stage, and I think it's absurd that you've showed up. And of course, it's great that you're here, but we live in an absurd country. And what do I mean by that? Our urge, our biological urge to have security, led us to create a world that's as unsafe as can be. We created structures that, meaning we're destroying our own ways of life. And as in psychology, we would call that insanity. And so what I want to do now with you and with your brains is a radically emotional journey in the next hour. And that's the title I gave this talk, Radically Emotional, just like my new book. You need to do a bit of advertising. And the subtitle is Why We Need Less Heart and More Brain. And maybe, you feel like that's, I can't agree with that. Like she says it's absurd that we're here, and now she says, we need less feeling. So what's up with that? So, and because I'm a good professor of media psychology, I want to start with a trigger warning. In these times, of digitization and online hate. So I think a trigger warning is in order. There's not going to be anything brutal, no weird images or nudity. But I'm going to change your brains. I'm a neuroscientist as well, so I like dealing with brains. And I don't just want to take you on this radically emotional journey, but I want to change your brains for the long term. And if you don't want that, you can, of course, you're free to leave the room. And there's other talks happening simultaneously as well. So I won't take that personally. But if you stay here, you've allowed me to change your brains. All right, almost everyone still sitting. So I want to ask you a radically emotional question now. And if you feel like it, you can close your eyes. If you feel up for it. What would have to happen for me to change my life? So maybe you can think of a situation where you did that before because you were very brave, moved to a new city, changed your job, began or ended a partnership, had kids, a radical change in your own life. What happened there? And what do you think, led you to make that decision? Your heart or your brain? Your body or your mind? Reason or emotion? Spoiler alert, it was always a decision you made in your mind. Because our heart is a great muscle, but emotions, they happen up here, just like reason. So no matter what you're thinking, it mostly happened up there in your head. And when we carry this brain around with us and, made it this far, so ignoring all of the absurd situation we're in right now, the history of humanity is a history of success, right? Well, cynically speaking, you can ask, look around you, what's going on in the world? So yes, it's a history of success, but it's also absurd because, like I said, we're heading straight for the destruction of our own livelihoods. And so I brought some facts and figures to demonstrate this to you. These are the global emissions of carbon dioxide starting in 1900 till the last year, 2023. And so if I were a cynic, I'd say, hooray, we achieved a new record last year. And that's absurd, because we've known for such a long time that the emission of greenhouse gases lead to the endangerment and the destruction of our own livelihoods. And we can also see the 6 planetary boundaries that we've already surpassed, 9 planetary boundaries in total. And this is from the first survey that looked at all 9 of these boundaries. And that as well is the absurd world that we're living in. And so what do these graphs do to you? I think they don't do that much, right? They're not emotionally charged at all. And maybe you're thinking, what should I do? I'm just a little human being. I'd rather go to Republica and listen to some talks. So what do we need to get out from that situation? At what point do we truly change our own lives? So it's not facts and figures, but emotions, real and present sense of danger. Like if the fire alarm went off in this building right now, there probably wouldn't be anyone remaining in the building, right? And the situation like this is the same. In English, you can say change by design or disaster. So, will we change because of pictures like that, or because we're clever and we realize that we are no longer able to live in this absurd world of ours? And so please think back to my initial question. What would have to happen for you to change your life? And reflect back on that question. All right, here it is. What would have to happen for you to change your life? That's the wrong question, isn't it? Instead, it's not about what would have to happen. What would I need to feel? What would I need to feel to change my life? Because the data I just showed you, you probably already knew that, right? So from the news, from surveys, from talking to other people, maybe you even had a talk with climate scientists, and we're still sitting here, right? Wouldn't we have to do something else and to actively get out of this absurd world of ours? Well, for that we have to accept that it's mostly about what we feel when it comes to change. And we're nothing else than, as a term of endearment, I call it emotional blobs. And that's something I came up with when I was very frustrated that someone, in front of an audience made the argument to be rational beings and not mix up emotions into that. And then at some point I became very emotional and a bit louder and pointed out that that's absurd. We can only make decisions as human beings, no matter if it's about a small or a big change, if it's about, what we'll have for lunch or what session we visit at Republica, because we have preferences, because we have emotions, because something in us tells us this is more important than anything else we could do. This is better than all the other dishes that we could have for lunch. And in that moment, we're emotional blobs. But the story we tell ourselves is the opposite of that. And that's what brought about this absurd world of ours, where we endanger our own need and wish for safety. Just think back on the planetary boundaries. And so I'm not standing on the stage today to just tell you, well, there's no way out and this is the way we are and that's why we're here. But mostly because I want to invite you to go on this brain journey with me and maybe develop some form of gratitude for this form of existence as an emotional blob. And so undergo this sort of this test of maturity, this like graduation exam with me, just like we would at school. And, if you're willing to accompany me, I'm an emotional blob as well. How can I deal with that situation better? And what can I do to help us all leave this absurd world behind? Yeah, and so I developed a 3-point thesis and 3 steps, that's easy to remember, right? And the first of those 3 steps is related to the trigger warning I mentioned earlier. So I told you I was going to change your brains, right? So why is that correct? And why is that correct in every moment of your waking lives, that other people change your brains? Well, because a brain changes from moment to moment. So you basically have to give that trigger warning all of the time. It's like implicit in all of human existence, because a brain changes all the time. And every information changes your brain that you take in. But most of the time we feel like that's not the case. And so that's why this trigger warning is so important, because now I have the most precious resource that you have, your attention. And you gave me the permission to change your brains. And so I want to start this test with you now, and that's radical attention. Let's see, there it is. Radical attention. And what that means is that, oftentimes we treat our attention with no big thought to it. We just let it sort of slide and glide all over, and something is ringing and clinging, and all of the devices that we use in our daily lives. And, that leads us to thinking that we're able to do 35 streams and whatever at once. And no one is good at multitasking, not even women. And so what we're doing is task switching. We jump back and forth between different stuff. And that means we miss a lot because we try to look at everything at once. Again, an absurd world that we're in. And what we see is we have this false perception of ourselves. And I hope that, you don't disagree with that. Because, we live in an absurd world. We have a false sense of ourselves, and we have a false perception. So stay with me, let your attention stay with me in the hopes that I can explain to you what exactly I mean. This false perception and the mirror, meant to represent it, means that oftentimes we have this image of reality that's not that close to the actual reality in front of us. And so now I could talk about cognitive biases and stuff like that. And, we have false memories. We don't know how to properly evaluate situations, depending on what humans we're with and what situations we're in. But I don't want to talk about that now. My focus now is on emotion. And my focus is on that we are mostly pretty illiterate when it comes to emotions. A major survey in the US found that when people were asked how many emotions can you name that you feel regularly, and they mentioned happy, sad, and pissed off. And so I don't know how the results would be like, what the results would be like in Germany, but I think that's a pretty, sad result. And so this test, how do we get out of that? How do we, cure this illiteracy, this emotional illiteracy? How do we become emotionally literate? And I think what we have to do is think back on this thought experiment,
an die ihr vielleicht eben gedacht habt.
the change that you maybe just thought about, or maybe multiple changes that you've made happen in your own lives. And
Warum ihr euch
think back on how you felt, why you changed, who exactly moved you to do that.
And why was it always an emotional process? And in the second step, we also have to recognize that emotions are the opposite of weakness, of being feminine, of being pathetic, of covering it up, not speaking about it. It's the basis of the human existence, of everything we do. We can only decide because we have emotions. Otherwise, we're incapable of taking a decision because we don't have preferences anymore. And if we manage to do that, to tell us a story of emotions and to recognize it within us and to realize that emotions are powerful, that they give you power, that it gives you strength to speak about them, then we can be emotional
der radikalen
alphabets. Well, we can reach emotional alphabetism, and then we can get to the second step, that there are no negative emotion. There's no such thing. And this is, you're probably going to say, this is the last I'm going to follow you. This is the end. You're telling me that hate and anger and all of these negative emotions are good, then I'm probably going to leave the room. And I'm saying this, and this is exactly how I mean it. There are no negative emotions. There is no value judgment with emotions. They just exist. They are there. And our first task is to recognize them and perceive them. And the second step is to deal with them. And that can actually be done in a positive or a negative way, or anything in between, really. But the emotion in itself and everything that's connected to it, there's no value judgment there, or they just exist. Anger, hate, love, anything that you enjoy, anything that you perceive positively, is how you deal with it in your brain, and we can influence that, the way we perceive them. And the reason why I give you this beach ball is it's because it's a common example in psychology. Because often when you think of, when you teach or when you tell yourself the story of negative emotions, then you suppress them, because anything that is negative, we try to ignore it, we try to suppress it. That's back to Absurdistan. So same with the beach ball. You have it on the surface of the water, you try to suppress it, and it's just going to come back up. And you're trying to avoid all of these things, like going through the rain, freezing in your car, all of these negative things. I want to be left out. I want to ignore it. But what happens with that? The same that happens with everything that you try to ignore. At some point, it's going to go boom. And this beach ball is not going to explode, but it will resurface at some point. And then you have 2 or 3 more, because you have other 2 or 3 more negative emotions that you try to suppress. And then you don't have enough hands and feet or any other part of the body that you could try to push them down with. And then it starts getting really uncomfortable. That's why we need an emotionally more mature way of dealing with these kind of things. And with all of emotions, really, one that lets us ask the question, what are these for, and not what am I against? This is the first ingredient that you need for this step in reaching maturity. It's something that you can apply over and over. Don't ask or don't say I'm not against this, something like protest songs, but carefully, slowly ask yourself, what do I stand for? What do I like? What do I love? How do I want to live tomorrow or the day after and the day after that? What do I need for that? Who do I need for that? Which emotions could help me? And then suddenly this is what makes us human. We feel good. We can get together as a group of humans and create what we envision. This is basically our superpower. This is what differentiates us from any other animal that lives on Earth. We can imagine something that hasn't happened yet. And in order to do that, we need to ask the why, or the why do we do this? So if you followed me thus far, then you realize even if we are these emotional blobs and nothing else, and then we are allowed to say, we all just want the one thing and not what you're thinking, but the answer really is being loved. This is the most immediate and primal desire, because being loved gives you security, and the brain up there is programmed. Well, programmed is the wrong way, but it's optimized towards searching for security. You're seeking security, and where do you get that? From people who love you, people who stick with you even when the danger reaches you, that will stick around when the going gets tough. And being loved is not enough. It's loving. It means you need to understand the other. You need to understand the other emotional blob. You need to want to understand them, even if they're acting irrationally from your point of view. And that is love, and that gives you security. It gives you trying to understand another human, and then together create a new purpose, a new reason why. And if you're trying to be truthful about this and live that way, then we can achieve this emotional maturity. And that's the first step in the graduation. So this you're almost at a third, and if we reach the next one, then we've already conquered more than half of it. So the next step is the next step in maturity. This goes beyond you as an individual and into the larger group. You get into connection with other humans. And what is this about? It's radical honesty. You cannot have this not on an emotion on a cellular level. You need to describe yourself in more terms than happy, sad, pissed off. You need to, as a next step, if you've done that, you can honestly communicate with other human beings. And if you don't have the wrong perception, then you can stop telling the wrong narratives that brought us to this point. That's why I have this book of fables here. I don't want to diss fables, but I mean, that's what they are, they're fables. And these wrong stories, or fables, let's call them, they led us to another world that is not secure, but that is what our brain is searching for. It needs security. So we need a change, but we don't want too much of it. So this is another image that is very rational, unemotional, but very clear. This is completely not normal. This is how far removed the global average temperature is from it where it was normally. And it gets even worse if you look at the projection for this. This is not normal. Normalcy is always a question of the time and the epoch. Anything that we consider normal now would be different than hundreds of years ago. The same for our language, our clothes, the mobility, anything that makes up our world and our way of life. It's always changing, not just in your head, but also your environment is changing all the time. So normalcy is always something that depends on the time you're living in. But we now come back to the question, design, change by design or disaster. Do we want to let disaster decide it because we just continue living as we did now? Or do we want to design it because we understood what really matters? And what this leads us to, this whole unnormalcy, anything like mobility, energy supply, I chose something very unemotional. Food. So clearly food is not normal. It's not unemotional. There are politicians in this country who say they couldn't live without a steak or a sausage. But so clearly this is an emotional question. But so maybe don't choose food. Let's take drinks, because that is clearly unemotional. Like everybody needs water, everybody needs a drink. So think about a breakfast table. Think about how normal or unnormal it is about the stories we tell each other. For example, orange juice. So some of you in the audience will say orange juice is an integral part of breakfast. And because of the unnormal way we act on this planet, we have been influenced in a way that in 2022, 10% of the orange trees in Florida were blown away by hurricanes. And we clearly know that the extreme weather events become more common the further the global climate changes. And similar for coffee, for example. The harvest for coffee beans is already suffering. In some places, you can hardly grow it anymore because of water issues. So you're going to say, who needs orange juice or coffee? As long as I get my beer, everything's fine. And here, same. Some of the growers are already saying, we're reaching another epoch where there won't be any hops. There are systemic shocks that they're talking about that will influence their harvests and the yield. And I could keep going on and on about different examples within our daily life that already, how much it has changed already and how unnormal it has become and how much more it will change with our behavior. But obviously, I as a researcher want to search the question, and I dragged you along this path. The question I always pose myself is, how did we get here? Who's telling all of these stories that are clearly wrong? Who brought us on this disastrous path? And, well, there is this elephant. He's an elephant bull. You see an example of it here. And he's always there when humans get together. It's already in this room. So maybe you don't see it, but you may feel it. So this elephant, if we choose German language, it has 5 bold letters on it. It says power. So the power elephant is always in the room when people exchange ideas and communicate, and it stands for the kind of decisions that we take as individuals. And the power elephant in the past was the reason why we took the bad decision, why we took very short-sighted decisions, why we chased profits, why we reached absurdistan, why we're on the path to destroy the basis of our existence. And the elephant plays an existential role in asking who has the power, who do we give power to, and who's allowed to take decisions. And historically speaking, I clearly do this with the neuro scientific lens. This is not meant as bashing or saying that in the past everything was bad, but in the past one gender or sex had the power, clearly, and here in this country still has, and that's men. That doesn't mean men are all bad, they're all wrong. It just means they're responsible for a lot of the stories that we tell each other. And I mean, clearly think about the word history. It already has his in it, and it tells you why. And I don't think the right approach would be to say, we had thousands of years of history, now we need her story. We really need our story. And our story tells us that we are the emotional blobs, that we need to get away from these fairy tales that destroy us. But how can we achieve this? And we need to talk about how to achieve success. What is normal? Orange juice, coffee, or beer? You need to be radically honest. We need to talk honest about what is success is. When have I achieved it? Do I need a degree for it? Do I need this much money in my bank account? If other people like me, obviously this is a digital conference, so it's important. If I have a large car, if I have a really large car, if I am allowed to take big decisions.
Wow! Habt ihr das mitgekriegt? Also, der Machtelefant. Hört ihr mich?
Sorry, the audio is gone.
Ja, okay.
Okay. Technisches Problem, ich muss kurz warten. Aber das ist ziemlich unheimlich, oder? Das kann sich keiner ausdenken. Ich warte jetzt ein...
All right, that's the back.
Also das finde ich jetzt echt gekonnt.
All right, well, great work.
Der Machtelefant. Ihr habt die...
All right, so the power elephant. You've gotten to know him. So what do we consider success? When we're powerful, when we can make handshakes, when we make decisions that influence lots of other people. Maybe we wear a Rolex watch on our wrist. And then, of course, then we have the question of war and peace, because that as well is always a question of power and a question of success, of recognition, or the opposite of that. And so how do we achieve, to get away from these false stories of success and, slowly but surely make a move out of this absurd world? Well, clearly by telling new stories, by leaving those old fables and fairy tales behind us and not using them anymore for creating our own lives and not using them as points for measuring success. And so early on, when I said we're just emotionally charged blobs, well, there was something missing about this first part of this test of maturity. When we look closely, we see that we're emotionally social blobs. And what do I mean by that? Well, I teased it earlier. We function in the most efficient way when there's other people there as well, when these small brains can stand on top of each other. And that's not breaking news. I didn't just find that out yesterday. Like, all survey results show us that. That's the basis of human life, and that's also the basis for this absurd situation we're in, because we know this, but we tell us the opposite. We tell us that the story of success, that we alone as individuals can make it, we need to make our way through using our elbows and whatnot, and be tough to get to the top and to have success. But that's so far removed from reality, all of these stories. The number one success story of humanity is cooperation. We gave up muscles to increase the size of our brain, and we needed to have a bigger brain in order to be able to cooperate, because that's so complicated. Oh, them and them and them and them, and you have so much cooperation going on, and that's why we have this huge prefrontal cortex right behind our forehead. And then we need less muscles, because let's face it, even our ancestors weren't able to fight a tiger on their own, or fly, or run over water or something like that. But we are able to cooperate, and thusly we're social emotional blobs. And if we're able to talk about that honestly, then we also can have a check mark on the second part of the test of maturity, and that's maturity of communication. And so now for the last part, which of course, as always, is the most difficult. And so, now it's about to get really personal and emotional, because it's really about radical attachment and radical closeness. And so you can probably figure out by now, oh, first she's going to talk about what are the errors we make, the mistakes. And yes, we're going to start with that. So it's the false structures that we've built up all around us. Small and large structures that make up this absurd world of ours. And now I want to have a break. I want to change the structure of the talk. I'm going to tell you right away what we need to do. We need to overcome what divides us. Because what divides us is what leads to this false situation. And so there's 3 divisions that happen. And I think that's a lot. And so we start with the first out of those 3 divisions. And that's the most personal one. It's in all of us. And for that, I brought a quote from a woman who was here 2 days ago. And she said, you can't just say what comes to your mind when you're the Secretary of State. And it's the most difficult part is when the heart says something different from the brain. And now you can say, wait, we were paying attention, and the speaker said, everything happens up in your head. And yeah, so I think that's a great example because it's a political example, and it shows that this most personal, most direct level always comes into play, even in the political sphere, the social sphere, and, decides on what we hold dear and what we think is right. And so, but we're in this situation where the Secretary of State has to make excuses and has to give an apology for being an emotional human being.
Und wie falsch das ist.
And how wrong that is relates to this basic idea that we're rational and that we're free of emotion. And again, that's not possible. We're only able to make decisions because we have emotions, because when people have the inability in their brain to not feel emotions anymore, they cannot decide between blue or green when asked to write something, because they're unable to make decisions when we don't have emotions. And that's why it's so absurd to have this split between heart and mind, because everything happens in the mind. And so how can we deal with this better? How can we leave this division behind us? And again, the successful history of humanity can show us what we can do, where our ancestors tried something new, came together, and overcame divides. So, for example, here we have an image, and some of you might recognize this. It's from the March on Washington for work and liberation. And this was a movement of black people, first of all, but then turned into a civil rights movement with people from all creeds coming together. And because they understood that, they're just emotional blobs, and they could ignore the color of each other's skin or gender and age. And so the rational thing there is that we come together to achieve something. And so that's a new understanding of rationality. And this new understanding allows us to overcome this fictional divide between rationality and emotion. And now the second part, again, a politician. I was in the audience and I listened, and Mr. Kretschmann from Baden-Württemberg was asked from someone on the panel, do you eat meat or no? Are you a vegetarian or not? And he responded, you're asking me a most personal question, and that's offensive. you asking me such a personal question in a political debate. And you can imagine how that went on. And so you might feel you already know what I'm getting at here, right? The divide between private and political, or personal and political. And, don't get me wrong, of course, there's stuff that only relates to me as a person. Of course, there's stuff that's private to me or maybe a few people in my life. But all decisions I take is political all the time, because it always relates to how we live together. And politics really is just like the decision-making process, overcoming various emotional states of various emotional blobs who are all just trying to be loved. And thus, everything political is private, and everything private is political. And so how do we overcome this divide? We have to understand that there's one ingredient, one key ingredient. Based on that, we try to take decisions. And that helps us as emotional blobs on our search for security, and that's trust. Trust is the basis for our decisions when it comes to voting, no matter what vote we're casting. And it's also the basis for what happens here these days. Everything that relates to media, and not just because of the term fake news. It's always about trust. And another component, it's political and social, and that will lead us to the next point, is trust and health. I need to trust when I go visit a doctor that they're doing a good job. And health is also a precondition for living a good life as an emotional blob. And so this is the bridge to the third and next and last, the ultimate dichotomy that we need to overcome to joyfully leave behind this absurd world of ours, because we were stuck there for so long. And of course, I brought a quote again, this time not from a politician, but from the president of the German Employers Association, Maren Urner. And I want to scream when I read that quote out loud. Protecting the climate, yes, of course, but not to the price that it ruins the economy. Yeah, so is this a joke? Is this a tragedy? When I read stuff like that, my whole body is like tensing up and wants to scream, that's wrong. We only can have an economy because there's a basis for it, right? A basis that allows us to be economically active. And so this is the most dangerous dichotomy that we tell ourselves, that nature and environment can be separated from humans, that economy and ecology can be divided from each other, that there's a party that wants to do something, green, and they deal with all that ecology stuff, and the rest of the parties deal with, hard, cold economy, and that's absurd. We can only be economically active because there's a basis for that. Because there's air, earth, and all other resources for that, like all of the technical equipment in this room. Because we have that. And it's absurd to think that we are able to separate these two from each other, or want to separate these two from each other. And if you think that's like too green, wishy-washy, please, I want to ask you to close your eyes again and just hold your breath for a little while.
Obviously, start breathing again before you faint, but count the number of seconds look at your watch maybe. How long can you do that until it starts feeling good or when you start feeling bad? When do you need air again? I can tell you it will definitely be below 24 minutes and a few seconds unless you're in the process of setting a new world record, because that is the world record for holding your breath underwater, set by a Croat recently. And 24 minutes, then that's the absolute limit to when we need air. And the air is representative for our environment, for ecology. And that's why it's so disastrous to say that we should save the environment or something, that we rescue the planet. We need to protect us. We need to save ourselves if we want to have a good life on this planet. It's not the environment itself that we're saving.
Okay, ich dachte, es kommt wieder.
Okay, sorry. I thought the power elephant is back in the room. I heard a voice, and I'm pretty sure it's not in my head. But that's the end of my talk with goosebumps. Thank you for the applause. And we reached the last step of maturity, the social maturity. When we have achieved this, then we can say, what's the reward? What do we get out of this? So obviously you get a stamp of approval, just like in school. You are now radically emotionally tested. You clearly reached maturity together with me. And this is a big but now, unfortunately. Now the real work starts beginning, but also obviously joy, because I hope you felt the joy. It can be great. Once you've understood this and you apply this, you can feel the joy. And it's similar to how when you got your driver's license, for example, or when you learned swimming and took a test at the end. If you learned something and you got the seal of, or the certificate or whatever, you got the license, then that's the point where you really understood how it worked. At least that's what it was like for me. I learned driving after the driver's license. I learned swimming after I did my first test. And it's the same like this seal of approval for our maturity. But if you let it be, and if you take this with you, maybe put it in your pocket or in your brain, maybe in a discussion with your neighbor, anything, if you take this home with you, and we can start what this last image is going to symbolize. It's a home run away from Absurdistan into the home that really feels good, that brings us joy, that we are living in the story that is true, that is truthful, that is not the fake one that we taught us in the past, the one where we're loved and where we love. Thank you.
Maren Urner.
Maren Urner. Thank you. Thank you for this talk. And now, if I'm correct, we have about 10 minutes for a short Q&A. So if you have questions, are there questions in the audience? Does someone want to ask something? Be bold. Try. There are no questions. Yeah, there's one. Okay, a very short one. Are you actually optimistic that this can work? Yeah. Did you say that was a small question, a little one? Okay, just so did I acoustically process that? I am unfortunately not. I'm neither optimist nor pessimist. I'm actively hopeful. What that means is, it took me a long time to find words to express what I mean in order to get this little truth out of my head and into the world. I get up in the morning every morning and pose the question to myself, what can I do today in order to contribute, not because I'm just a great human or something, or because I have fun with it. I want to contribute to the process of leaving Exodistan. And the only thing that helps me, and this may be cheesy, but I just held a talk about radical emotionally. Hope doesn't mean knowing that the end will be good. It means the conviction that what you're doing is has a point, that it has a purpose, that it's that it's valuable. Are there other questions in the audience? No matter where you are, we will pass the mic to you.
Doch, da ist noch eine Frage. Einmal hier vorne, guck mal da.
Okay, here in the front.
Hallo und danke.
Hello, thank you for this great talk. I always find it difficult to know what to do, but not understand where it came from. And for example, the global trauma, as I want to call it, for us as Germans, it's the Second World War, for example, but there are others, globally speaking. For example, I'm interested in polyvagal therapy, but shouldn't we all be in therapy just to be able to do something about it? Well, I'm trying to keep it short. Therapy always sounds, I mean, it's in the word, it's therapeutic, and a lot of people say they don't need therapy, and clearly, or they're correct or not correct, depending. But what, at least in my opinion, not because I thought about it, but because I try to understand this scientifically, you need to radical honesty in the when connecting with another human being in order to be able to reach more honesty in semi-open and open communication when you go out into the public. And this is a lot I've learned from forms of organization in different places in the world where where I would say they have emotional maturity in their acting. They have spaces where you can let the feelings be, where this allows us to talk about it, to let it all out. It doesn't matter where it comes from. I'm not a proponent of the point that you should process everything and to figure all of this out. We don't have the time for that. And also, without going into the research again, it's often not even beneficial to do that. But what is important is to give you the space if you have that need, but also create that, and then even applaud you for doing that, for the courage that you have. It's not weak if you need therapy. You don't. There's this whole discrimination happening. Basically, this distinction between psychological problems and physical problems. Every emotion that you have, every feeling has a biological basis, has a physiological basis. It happens in your head, and part of overcoming this divide between those two problems would be to stop making a distinction between psychological diseases and physiological diseases. And but in the end, we only have one body and mind, and they only have on one set of diseases, and we need to make the mind happy, and we need a lot of things for that, but we especially need those spaces that allow us. We need to stop using that dichotomy. We need to stop dividing these things up. Okay, if we look at the prerequisites and we dream about emotional well-being, about psychological well-being, we need a lot more therapy offers, enough spaces with therapists, for example. Mic's still open. There's one more question. Hi. I want to ask about the radical emotionality. example at a workplace. They're not usually safe spaces, and it's not easy to open up emotionally there. And okay, again, another one of those little questions. Of course, there isn't a quick fix. Of course, the easy way would be everybody does it differently tomorrow, and we all start doing it the way I envision. But obviously, that is unrealistic. So, just to put it mildly. But what we can see is, and this is definitely about what I've conveyed with the wrong stories that we tell each other, the little lies, that if companies and employers are open to a new way of work that is adjusted to the human biology, and if they offer a form of life, a form of work that is aligned with what the human needs, and then they will be more successful in the long run. But the problem or the challenge from the neuroscientific perspective is that the human brain has a tendency to think very short-sightedly. So, for example, there was a study that gave us data that if we are asked to think into the future, how far ahead do you think? And the result was basically tomorrow and lunch. And very few people think about a future 3, 10, 30 years from now. But why is that important? Because that's obviously how decisions are made in a company. And that's what you're also alluding to, that if you have a lot of fear and uncertainty in a situation at the workplace, because you're unsure how you feel and if anybody's interested in that, and if you're safe, then I have an even more short-sighted perspective, because a brain that is afraid, is scared, and it goes into emergency mode. And long story short, the answer is to uncover the lies we tell in the stories. What can I as an individual do? I can obviously try to find a workplace that is better, that is closer to the ideal, and then I can try to motivate other people to that. For example, be politically active, to form an association, an NGO, if you go to a union. But that's the image that Marsha Washington painted. Only if people collectivize and unionize, things will change. They need to start walking small steps now to change the future.
Dieses nur sehr kurzfristige Planen kenne ich auch.
Okay, this is obviously that I know this very short-sighted planning from shopping, but I always try to buy for the weekend, but I can only buy my groceries for 2 days in advance. Okay, there's another question there.
Ja, danke schön.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, if you move in the circles where AI is being developed, I often have the impression that many of the people there have a need to understand and experience radical emotion and radical honesty. Do you have a strategy how to do that? Okay, don't pass the mic away. Are you asking how to change the interaction with humans or with the AI? Maybe the people developing the AI are the key. So these people are speaking a very unemotional language. So, okay, there are a lot of aspects to that question, but time's ticking. So one of the aspects that I'm very interested from a neuroscientific perspective, especially when talking to people that develop AI, how do we deal with all the biases that we already alluded to? I see the biggest chance here in that AI is always based on data, and it's always learning from the data, and it can actually teach us where our own limitations are, especially with respect to the processing of these. The AI is really just a mirror, to not so dissimilar from the image of the mirror that I showed you earlier, not just about emotions. For example, say if you only hire men and the AI then also predicts that you will hire another man, then the AI isn't the problem, but rather it shows you your own biases and that you need to change the way you do things. Thank you, Maren. Thank you for the talk. Okay, there will be a signing for if you bought a book and you want to have it signed, please move over there. Give a warm hand of applause for Maren.